A Fable for Critics by James Russell Lowell 1890. Phœbus, sitting one day in a laurel-tree shade, was reminded of Daphne, of whom it was made, that the god being one day too warm in his wooing, she took to the tree to escape his pursuing, be the cause what it might. From his offers she shrunk, and, Ginevra-like, shut herself up in a trunk, and, though 'twas a step into which he had driven her, he somehow or other had never forgiven her. Her memory he nursed as a kind of a tonic, something bitter to chew when he'd play the Byronic, and I can't count the obstinate nymphs that he brought over by a strange kind of smile he put on when he thought of her.
My case is like Dido's,
he sometimes remarked.
When I last saw my love, she was fairly embarked in a laurel, as she thought, but how fate mocks. She has found it, by this time, a very bad box. Let hunters from me take this soul when they need it. We're not always sure of your game when you treat it.
Just conceive such a change taking place in one's mistress.
What romance would be left?
Who can flatter or kiss trees?
And, for mercy's sake, how could one keep up a dialogue with a dull wooden thing that will live and will dialogue? Not to say that the thought would forever intrude that you've less chance to win her the more she is wood.
Ah, it went to my heart, and the memory still grieves, to see those loved graces all taking their leaves, those charms beyond speech, so enchanting, but now, as they left me forever, each making its bow.
If her tongue had a tang sometimes more than was right, her new bark is worse than 10 times her old bite.
Now, Daphne, before she was happily deified over all other blossoms the lily had deified, and when she expected the god on her visit 'twas before he had made his intentions explicit. Some buds she arranged with a vast deal of care, to look as if artlessly twined in her hair, where they seemed, as he said, when he paid his addresses, like the day breaking through the long night of her tresses. So whenever he wished to be quite irresistible, like a man with 8 trumps in his hand at a whist table, I feared me at first that the rhyme was untwistable, though I might have lugged in an allusion to Christabel. He would take up a lily, and gloomily look in it, as I shall at when they cut up my book in it. Well, here, after all the bad rhyme I've been spinning, I've got back at last to my story's beginning, sitting there, as I say, in the shade of his mistress, as dull as a volume of old Chester mysteries, or as those puzzling specimens which, in old histories, we read of his verses, the oracles, namely. I wonder the Greek should have swallowed them tamely, for one might bet safely whatever he has to risk, they were laid at his door by some ancient Miss Asterisk, and so dull that the men who retailed them outdoors caught the ill name of augurs, because they were bawds. First, he mused what the animal substance or herb is would induce a moustache, for you know he's in Phœbus. Then he shuddered to think how his youthful position was assailed by the age of his son the physician. At some poems he glanced, had been sent to him lately, and the metre and sentiment puzzled him greatly.
Miracle! I'd make such proceeding felonious, had they all of them slept in the cave of Trophonius.
Look well to your seat, 'tis like taking an airing on a corduroy road, and that out of repairing it leads one, 'tis true, through the primitive forest, grand natural features, but then one has no rest. You just catch a glimpse of some ravishing distance, when a jolt puts the whole of it out of existence. Why not use their ears, if they happen to have any?
Here the lowlies murmured the name of poor Daphne.
Oh, weep with me, Daphne,
He sighed.
for you know it's a terrible thing to be pestered with poets. But, alas, she is dumb, and the proverb holds good, she never will cry till she's out of the wood.
What wouldn't I give if I never had known of her? 'Twere a kind of relief had I something to groan over. If I had but some letters of hers now to toss over, I might turn for the non-seer Byronic philosopher, and bewitch all the flats by bemoaning the loss of her.
One needs something tangible, though, to begin on, a loom, as it were, for the fancy to spin on what beats all your grist. It can never be ground till a breeze makes the arms of the windmill go round, or, if 'tis a water-mill, alter the metaphor, and say, won't stir, save the wheel be well wetter for, or lug in some stuff about water so dreamily.
It is not a metaphor, though 'tis a simile. A lily, perhaps, would set my mill a-going, for just at this season, I think, they are blowing. Here, somebody, fetch one not very far hence, they're in bloom by the score, 'tis but climbing a fence. There's a poet hard by, who does nothing but fill his whole garden, from one end to t'other, with lilies. A very good plan, were it not for satiety. One longs for a weed here and there, for variety, though a weed is no more than a flower in disguise, which is seen through at once, if love give a man eyes. Now there happened to be among Phœbus's followers a gentleman, one of the omnivorous swallowers, who bolt every book that comes out of the press, without the least question of larger or less, whose stomachs are strong at the expense of their head, for reading new books is like eating new bread. One can bear it at first, but by gradual steps he is brought to death's door of a mental dyspepsy. On a previous stage of existence, our hero had ridden outside, with a glass below zero he had been, 'tis a fact you may safely rely on, of a very old stock, a most eminent scion, a stock all fresh quacks their fierce boluses ply on, who stretch the new boots earth unwilling to try on, whom humbugs of all shapes and sorts keep their eye on, whose hairs in the mortar of every new scion, who, when whistles are dear, go directly and buy one, who think slavery a crime that we must not say fie on, who hunt, if they e'er hunt at all, with the lion, though they hunt lions also, whenever they spy one, who contrive to make every good fortune a wry one, and at last choose the hard bed of honour to die on, whose pedigree, traced to earth's earliest years, is longer than anything else but their ears. In short, he was sent into life with the wrong key. He unlocked the door, and stepped forth a poor donkey. Though kicked and abused by his bipedal betters, yet he filled no mean place in the kingdom of letters. Far happier than many a literary hack, he bore only paper mill rags on his back, for it makes a vast difference which side the mill one expends on the paper his labour and skill. So, when his soul waited a new transmigration, and destiny balanced twixt this and that station, not having much time to expend upon bothers, remembering he'd had some connection with authors, and considering his forelegs had grown paralytic, she set him on too, and he came forth a critic. Through his babyhood no kind of pleasure he took in any amusement but tearing a book. For him there was no intermediate stage from babyhood up to straight-laced middle age. There were years when he didn't wear coat-tails behind, but a boy he could never be rightly defined like the Irish good folk, though in length scarce a span. From the womb he came gravely, a little old man, while other boys' trousers demanded the toil of the motherly fingers on all kinds of soil, red, yellow, brown, black, clay, gravelly, loamy. He sat in the corner and read Fairy Rom. He never was known to unbend or to revel once in base, marbles, hockey, or kick up the devil once. He was just one of those who excite the benevolence of your old prigs, who sound the soul's depths with a ledger, and are on the lookout for some young men to
educate,
as they call it, who won't be too costly, and who'll afterward take to the ministry mostly, who always wear spectacles, always look bilious, always keep on good terms with each mater-familias throughout the whole parish, and manage to rear 10 boys like themselves on 400 a year, who, fulfilling in turn the same fearful conditions, either preach through their noses or go upon missions. In this way our hero got safely to college, where he bolted alike both his commons and knowledge a reading machine. Always wound up and going, he mastered whatever was not worth the knowing, appeared in a gown, with black waistcoat of satin, to spout such a Gothic oration in Latin that Tully could never have made out a word in it, though himself was the model that author preferred in it, and grasping the parchment which gave him in feet all the mystic and so forth contained in A.B. he was launched. Life is always compared to a sea, with just enough learning and skill for the using it, to prove he'd a brain, by forever confusing it. So worthy St. Benedict, piously burning with the holiest zeal against secular learning, Nescience xainter, as writers express it, indoctus sapienter Roma recessit. 'Twould be endless to tell you the things that he knew, each a separate fact, undeniably true, but with him or each other they'd nothing to do, no power of combining, arranging, discerning, adjusted the masses he learned into learning. There was one thing in life he had practical knowledge for, and this, you will think, he need scarce go to college for. Not a deed would he do, nor a word would he utter, till he'd weighed its relations to plain bread and butter. When he left alma mater, he practiced his wits in compiling the journal's historical bits, of shops broken open, men falling in fits, great fortunes in England bequeathed to poor printers, and cold spells, the coldest for many past winters. Then, rising by industry, knack, and address, got notices up for an unbiased press, with a mind so well poised, it seemed equally made for applause or abuse, just which chanced to be paid for. From this point his progress was rapid and sure, to the post of a regular heavy reviewer. And here I must say he wrote excellent articles on Hebraical points, or the force of Greek particles. They filled up the space nothing else was prepared for, and nobody read that which nobody cared for. If any old book reached a 50th edition, he could fill 40 pages with safe erudition. He could gauge the old books by the old set of rules, and his various old nothings pleased various old fools. But give him a new book, fresh out of the heart, and you put him at sea without compass or chart. His blunders aspired to the rank of an art, for his law was in craft, something foreign that grew in him, exhausting the sap of the native and true in him, so that when a man came with a soul that was new in him, carving new forms of truth out of nature's old granite, new and old at their birth, like Leverrier's planet, which, to get a true judgment, themselves must create in the soul of their critic the measure and weight, being rather themselves a fresh standard of grace, to compute their own judge, and assign him his place. A reviewer would crawl all about it and round it, and, reporting each circumstance just as he found it, without the least malice, his record would be profoundly aesthetic as that of a flea, which, supping on Wordsworth, should print, for our sakes, recollections of nights with the bard of the lakes, or, lodged by an Arab guide, ventured to render a comprehensive account of the ruins of Dendera. As I said, he was never precisely unkind. The defect in his brain was just absence of mind. If he boasted, 'twas simply that he was self-made, a position which I, for one, never gainsaid. My respect for my Maker supposing a skill in his works which our hero would answer but ill, and I trust that the mould which he used may be cracked, or he, made bold by success, may enlarge his phylactery, and set up a kind of a manufactory, an event which I shudder to think about, seeing that man is a moral, accountable being. He meant well enough, but was still in the way, as dunces still are. Let them be where they may. Indeed, they appear to come into existence to impede other folks with their awkward assistance. If he set up a dunce on the very North Pole all alone with himself, I believe, on my soul, he'd manage to get betwixt somebody's shins, and pitch him down bodily, all in his sins, to the grave polar bears sitting round on the ice, all shortening their grace, to beat in for a slice, or, if he found nobody else there to pother, why, one of his legs would just trip up the other, for there's nothing we read of in Torture's inventions like a well-meaning dunce with the best of intentions. A terrible fellow to meet in society. Not the toast that he buttered was ever so dried. At tea there he'd sit at the table and stir in his sugar, crouching close for a spring, all the while, like a cougar. Be sure of your facts, of your measures and weights, of your time. He's as fond as an Arab of dates. You'll be telling, perhaps, in your comical way, of something you've seen in the course of the day, and, just as you're tapering at the conclusion, you venture an ill-fated classic allusion. The girls have all got their laughs ready, when, whack, the cougar comes down on your thunderstruck back. You had left out a comma, your Greeks put in joint, and pointed at cost of your story's whole point. In the course of the evening you find chance for certain soft speeches to Anne. In the shade of the curtain, you tell her your heart can be likened to one flower.
And that, O most charming of women, is the sunflower, which turns.
Here a clear nasal voice, to your terror, from outside the curtain, says,
That's all an error.
As for him, he's no matter, he never grew tender, sitting after a bowl, with his feet on the fender, shaping somebody's sweet features out of cigar smoke, though he'd willingly grant ye that such doings as smoked all women he downs with mutable semper, and if ever he felt something like love's distemper, 'twas towards a young lady who spoke ancient Mexican, and assisted her father in making a lexicon, though I recollect hearing him get quite ferocious about Mary Clausen, the mistress of Grotius, or something of that sort. But no more to bore ye with character painting, I'll turn to my story. Now, Apollo, who finds it convenient sometimes to get his coat clear of the makers of rhymes, the genus, I think it is called, irritabile, every one of whom thinks himself treated most shabbily, and nurses a what is it? Immedicabile, which keeps him, at boiling point, hot for a quarrel, as bitter as wormwood, and sourer than sorrel. If any poor devil but look at a laurel Apollo, I say, being sick of their writing, though he sometimes acknowledged their verse had a quieting effect after dinner, and seemed to suggest a retreat to the shrine of tranquil siesta, kept our hero at hand, who, by means of a prey, which he gave to the life, drove the rabble away, and if that wouldn't do, he was sure to succeed. If he took his review out and offered to read, or, failing in plans of this milder description, he would ask for their aid to get up a subscription, considering that authorship wasn't a rich craft, to print the
American drama of witchcraft. Stay, I'll read you a scene.
But he hardly began, ere Apollo shrieked,
Help!
and the authors all ran, and once, when these purgatives acted with less spirit, and the desperate case asked to remedy desperate, he drew from his pocket a foolscap epistle as calmly as if 'twere a 9-barreled pistol, and threatened them all with the judgment to come of
A wandering star's first impressions of Rome. Stop! Stop!
with their hands or their ears, screamed the muses.
He may go off and murder himself if he chooses. 'Twas a mean self-defense only sanctioned his trying. 'Tis mere massacre now that the enemy's flying. If he's forced to tea again, and we happen to be there, give us each a large handkerchief soaked in strong ether.
I called this a
Fable for critics.
You think it's more of a display of my rhythmical trinket to my plot, like an icicle, as slender and slippery, every moment more slender, and likely to slip awry, and the reader unwilling in loco de zipper is free to jump over as much of my flipperies as he fancies, and, if he's a provident skipper, he may have like Odysseus control of the gales, and get safe to port, ere his patience quite fails. Moreover, although 'tis a slender return for your toil and expense, yet my paper will burn, and, if you have manfully struggled thus far with me, you may end twist me up, and just light your cigar with me. If too angry for that, you can tear me in pieces, and my member disdector consign to the breezes, a fate like great Ratzaus, whom one of those boors who befleed with bad verses. Poor Louis Quatorze describes the first verse somehow ends with victoire, as dispersant part out et ses members et sa gloire, or, if I were over desirous of earning a repute among noodles for classical learning, I could pick you a score of allusions, I wise, as new as the jests of Didascalos. 'Tis a better still, I could make out a good solid list from authors recondite who do not exist, but that would be naughty. At least, I could twist something out of Obstinate, or turn your inquiries after Milton's prose metaphor, drawn from Osiris. But, as Cicero says, he won't say this or that a fetch, I must say, most transparent and flat. After saying whatever he could possibly think of, I simply will state that I pause on the brink of a mire, ankle deep, of deliberate confusion, made up of old jumbles of classic allusion. So, when you were thinking yourselves to be pitied, just conceive how much harder your teeth you'd have gritted, and 'twere not for the dullness I've kindly omitted. I'd apologize here for my many digressions, were it not that I'm certain to trip into fresh ones. 'Tis so hard to escape if you get in their mesh once. Just reflect, if you please, how 'tis said by Horatius, that Monides nods now and then, and, my gracious, it certainly does look a little bit ominous when he gets under way with ton de pame. Here something occurs which I'll just clap a rhyme to, and say it myself, ere Zoilus have time to. Any author a nap like Van Winkle's may take, if he only contrive to keep readers awake, but he'll very soon find himself laid on the shelf, if they fall a nodding when he nods himself. Once for all, to return, and to stay, will I, when P.H. Bus expressed his desire for a lily, our hero, whose homeopathic sagacity with an ocean of zeal mixed his drop of capacity, set off for the garden as fast as the wind, or, to take a comparison more to my mind, as a sound politician leaves conscience behind, and leaped the low fence, as a party hack jumps o'er his principles, when something else turns up trumps. He was gone a long time, and Apollo, meanwhile, went over some sonnets of his with a file, for, of all compositions, he thought that the sonnet best repaid all the toil you expended upon it. It should reach with one impulse the end of its course, and for one final blow collect all of its force. Not a verse should be salient, but each one should end with a wave-like upgathering to break at the end, so, condensing the strength here, there smoothing a right ink. He was killing the time, when up walked Mr. D at a few steps behind him. A small man in glasses went dodging about, muttering,
"Murders."
Office.
From out of his pocket a paper he'd take, with a proud look of martyrdom tied to its stake, and, reading a squib at himself, he'd say,
"Here I see gainst American letters a bloody conspiracy. They are all by my personal enemies written. I must post an anonymous letter to Britain, and show that this goal is the merest suggestion of spite at my zeal on the copyright question, for, on this side the water, 'tis prudent to pull o'er the eyes of the public their national wool. I accusing of slavish respect to John Bull all American authors who have more or less of that anti-American humbug success, while in private we are always embracing the knees of some twopenny editor over the seas, and licking his critical shoes, for you know 'tis the whole aim of our lives to get one English notice, and my American puffs I would willingly burn all. They are all from one source, monthly, weekly, diurnal, to get but a kick from a transmarine journal."
So, culling the jibes of each critical scorner as if they were plums, and himself were Jack Connor, he came cautiously on, peeping round every corner, and into each hole where a weasel might pass in, expecting the knife of some critic assassin, who stabs to the heart with a caricature, not so bad as those dolls of the Sun, to be sure, yet done with a daguerreotype, whose vile portraits disperse all one's good and condense all one's poor traits. Apollo looked up, hearing footsteps approaching, and slipped out of sight the new rhymes he was broaching.
"Good day, Mr. D. I'm happy to meet with a scholar so ripe, and a critic so neat, who through Grub Street the soul of a gentleman carries. What news from that suburb of London and Paris, which latterly make such shrill claims to monopolize the credit of being the new world's metropolis?" "Why, nothing of consequence, save this attack on my friend there behind, by some pitiful hack, who thinks every national author a poor one that isn't a copy of something that's foreign, and assaults the American Dick. Nay, 'tis clear that your Darman there's fond of a flea in his ear, and, if no one else furnished them gratis, on tick he would buy some himself, just to hear the old click. Why, I honestly think, if some fool in Japan should turn up his nose at the poems on man which contain many verses as fine, by the by, as any that lately came under my eye, your friend there by some inward instinct would know it, would get it translated, reprinted, and show it as a man might take off a high stock to exhibit the autograph round his own neck of the gibbet, and all would let it rest so, but fire column after column, signed Cato, or Brutus, or something as solemn, by way of displaying his critical crosses, and tweaking that poor transatlantic proboscis, his broadsides resulting this last there's no doubt of in successively sinking the craft they're fired out at. Now nobody knows when an author is hit. If he have not a public hysterical fit, let him only keep close in his snug garret's dim ether, and nobody'd think of his foes or of him either. If an author have any least fibre of worth in him, a piece would but tickle the organ of mirth in him. All the critics on earth cannot crush with their ban one word that's in tune with the nature of man.
Well, perhaps so. Meanwhile I have brought you a book, into which if you'll just have the goodness to look, you may feel so delighted when once you are through it as to deem it not unworth your while to review it, and I think I can promise your thoughts, if you do, a place in the next democratic review.
The most thankless of gods you must surely have thought me, for this is the 44th copy you've brought me. I have given them away, or at least I have tried, but I have 42 left, standing all side by side. The man who accepted that one copy died. From one end of a shelf to the other they reach, with the author's respects neatly written in each.
The publisher, sure, will proclaim a tedium when he hears of that order the British Museum has sent for one set of what books were first printed in America, little or big, for 'tis hinted that this is the first truly tangible hope he has ever had raised for the sale of a copy.
I've thought very often 'twould be a good thing in all public collections of books, if a wing were set off by itself, like the seas from the dry lands, marked literature suited to desolate islands, and filled with such books as could never bear eat save by readers of proofs, forced to do it for bread, such books as one's wrecked on in small country taverns, such as hermits might mortify over in caverns, such as Satan, if printing had then been invented, as the climax of woe, would to Job have presented, such as Crusoe might dip in, although there are few so outrageously cornered by fate as poor Crusoe, and since the philanthropists just now are binding and gibbeting all who are in favour of hanging, though Cheever has proved that the Bible and altar were let down from heaven at the end of a halter, and that vital religion would dull and grow callous, unrefreshed, now and then, with a sniff of the gallows, and folks are beginning to think it looks odd to choke a poor scamp for the glory of God, and that he who esteems the Virginia reel a bait to draw saints from their spiritual wheel, and regards the quadrille as a far greater knavery than crushing his African children with slavery, since all who take part in a waltz or cotillion are mounted for hell on the devil's own pillion, who, as every true orthodox Christian well knows, approaches the heart through the door of the toes. That he, I was saying, whose judgments are stored for such as take steps in despite of his word, should look with delight on the agonized prancing of a wretch who has not the least ground for his dancing, while the state, standing by, sings a verse from the Psalter about offering to God on his favourite halter, and, when the legs droop from their twitching divergence, sells the clothes to a Jew, and the corpse to the surgeons. Now, instead of all this, I think I can direct you all to a criminal code both humane and effectual. I propose to shut up every doer of wrong with these desperate books, for such term, short or long, as by statute in such cases made and provided, shall be by your wise legislators decided. Thus let murderers be shut, to grow wiser and cooler, at hard labour for life on the works of petty thieves, kept from flagrant crimes by their fears, shall peruse Yankee Doodle a blank term of years, that American punch, like the English, no doubt, just the sugar and lemons and spirit left out.
But stay, here comes Titters Griswold, and leads on the flocks whom he first plucks alive, and then feeds on, a loud cackling swarm, in whose feathers warm dressed, he goes for as perfect a swan as the rest.
There comes Emerson first, whose rich words, every one, are like gold nails in tables to hang trophies on, whose prose is grand verse, while his verse, the Lord knows, is some of it pr no. 'Tis not even prose, and speaking of meters, as some poems have welled from those rare depths of soul that have ne'er been excelled, are they not epics? But that doesn't matter a pin. In creating, the only hard things to begin, a grass blade's no easier to make than an oak. If you've once found the way, you've achieved the grand stroke. In the worst of his poems are mines of rich matter, but thrown in a heap with a crash and a clatter. Now it is not one thing nor another alone makes a poem, but rather the general tone, the something pervading, uniting the whole, the before unconceived, unconceivable soul, so that just in removing this trifle or that, you take away, as it were, a chief limb of the statue. Roots, wood, arc, and leaves singly perfect may be, but clapped hodgepodge together, they don't make a tree.
But to come back to Emerson, whom, by the way, I believe we left waiting, his is, we may say, a Greek head on right Yankee shoulders, whose range has Olympus for one pole, for the other the exchange. He seems, to my thinking, although I'm afraid the comparison must, long ere this, have been made, of Plotinus Montaigne, where the Egyptians gold mist and the Gascons shoot where cheek by jowl coexist, all admire, and yet scarcely 6 converts he's got. I don't know they either exactly know what, for though he builds glorious temples, 'tis odd he leaves never a doorway to get in a god.
'Tis refreshing to old-fashioned people like me to meet such a primitive pagan as he, in whose mind all creation is duly respected as parts of himself just a little projected, and who's willing to worship the stars and the sun, a convert to nothing but Emerson. So perfect a balance there is in his head, that he talks of things sometimes as if they were dead: life, nature, love, God, and affairs of that sort, he looks at as merely ideas, in short, as if they were fossils stuck round in a cabinet, of such vast extent that our earth's a mere dab in it, composed just as he is inclined to conjecture her, namely, 1 part pure earth, 9 to 9 parts pure. Lecturer, you are filled with delight at his clear demonstration. Each figure, word, gesture just fits the occasion. With the quiet precision of science he'll sort 'em, but you can't help suspecting the whole a post-mortem. There are persons, more blind to the soul's make and style, who insist on a likeness twixt him and Carlyle. To compare him with Plato would be vastly fairer. Carlyle's the more burly, but e'en is the rarer. He sees fewer objects, but clearer, truer. If C. as original, E. more peculiar in that he's more of a man, you might say, of the one, of the other. He's more of an Emerson. C. the Titan, as shaggy of mind as of limb, E. the clear-eyed Olympian, rapid and slim. The one's 2/3 Norseman, the other half Greek, where the one's most abounding, the others to seek. C. generals require to be seen in the mass. E. specialties gain if enlarged by the glass. C. gives nature and God his own fits of Phœbus, and rims common sense things with mystical hues. E. sits in a mystery calm and intense, and looks coolly around him with sharp common sense. He shows you how everyday matters unite with the dim transdiurnal recesses of night, while he, in a plain, preternatural way, makes mysteries matters of mere everyday. C. draws all his characters quite effusively, not sketching their bundles of muscles and thews illy. He paints with a brush so untamed and profuse, they seem nothing but bundles of muscles and thews. E'en is rather like Flaxman, line straight and severe, and a colourless outline, but full, round, and clear to the men he thinks worthy. He frankly accords the design of a white marble statue in words. C. labours to get at the centre, and then take a reckoning from there of his actions and men. He calmly assumes the said centre as granted, and, given himself, has whatever is wanted. He has imitators in scholars, who omit no part of the man but his wisdom and wit, who go carefully o'er the sky blue of his brain, and when he has skimmed it once, skim it again. If at all they resemble him, you may be sure it is because their shawls mirror his mists and obscurities, as a mud puddle seems deep as heaven firmament, while a cloud that floats o'er is reflected within it. There comes, for instance, to see him's rare sport, tread in Emerson's tracks with legs painfully short, how he jumps, how he strains, and gets red in the face, to keep step with the mystagogue's natural pace. He follows as close as a stick to a rocket, his fingers exploring the prophet's each pocket. Fie, for shame, brother bard, with good fruit of your own, can't you let neighbour Emerson's orchards alone? Besides, 'tis no use, you'll not find Ennicore has picked up all the windfalls before. They might strip every tree, and he never would catch his Hesperides have no rude dragon to watch when they send him a dishful, and ask him to try he never suspects how the sly rogues came by he wonders why 'tis there are none such as trees on, and thinks the best he has tasted this season. Yonder, calm as a cloud, Alcott stalks in a dream, and fancies himself in thy grove's academy, with a pop and an eye, and the olive trees o'er him, and never an act to perplex him or bore him, with a snug room at Plato's when night comes to walk to, and people from morning till midnight to talk to, and from midnight till morning, nor snore in their listening. So he muses, his face with the joy of a glistening, for his highest conceit of a happy estate is where they'd live upon acorns, and hear him talk gratis, and indeed, I believe, no man ever talked better. Each sentence hangs perfectly poised to a letter, he seems piling words, but there's royal dust hid in the heart of each sky-piercing pyramid. While he talks he is great, but goes out like a taper, if you shut him up closely with pen, ink, and paper. Yet his fingers itch for from morning till night, and he thinks he does wrong if he don't always write in this, as in all things, a lamb among men. He goes to sure death when he goes to his pen. Close behind him is Branson, his mouth very full with attempting to gulp a Gregorian boiled, who contrives, spite of that, to pour out as he goes a stream of transparent and forcible prose. He shifts quite about, then proceeds to expound that 'tis merely the earth, not himself, that turns round, and wishes it clearly impressed on your mind that the weathercock rules and not follows, the wind approving first, then as deftly confuting each side, with no doctrine pleased that's not somewhere denied, he lays the denier away on the shelf, and then down beside him lies gravely himself. He's the salt river boatman, who always stands willing to convey friend or foe without charging a shilling, and so fond of the trip that, when leisure's to spare, he'll row himself up, if he can't get a fare. The worst of it is, that his logic so strong, that of two sides he commonly chooses the wrong. If there is only one, why, he'll split it in two, and first pummel this half, then that, black and blue. That white's white needs no proof, but it takes a deep fellow to prove it jet black, and that jet black is yellow. He offers the true faith to drink in a sieve. When it reaches your lips there's naught left to believe, but a few silly jisms that squat like tadpoles, o'erjoyed with the mud at the bottom.
There's Willis, all natty and jaunty and gay, who says his best things in so foppish a way, with conceit and pet phrases so thickly all in that one hardly knows whether to thank him for saying over ornament ruins both poem and prose. Just conceive of a muse with a ring in her nose. His prose had a natural grace of its own, and enough of it too, if he'd let it alone, but he twitches and jerks so, one fairly gets tired, and is forced to forgive where one might have admired, yet wherever it slips away free and unlaced, it runs like a stream with a musical waste, and gurgles along with the liquidous sweep. 'Tis not deep as a river, but he'd have it deep.
In a country where scarcely a village is found that has not its author sublime and profound, for someone to be slightly shallow is a duty, and Willis's shallowness makes half his beauty. His prose wins along with a blithe, gurgling air, and reflects all of heaven it can see in its mirror. 'Tis a narrow strip, but it is not an artifice, 'tis the true out of doors with its genuine hearty fizz. It is nature herself, and there's something in that, since most brains reflect but the crown of a hat.
Few volumes I know to read under a tree, more truly delightful than his elaborate, with the shadows of leaves flowing over your book, light ripple shades netting the bed of a brickle wood, June coming softly your shoulder to look over, breezes waiting to turn every leaf of your book over, and nature to criticize still as you read. The page that bears, that is a rare one indeed. He's so innate a cockney, that had he been born where plain bare skins there's only full dress that is worn, he'd have given his own such an air that you'd say he had been made by a tailor to lounge in Broadway. His nature's a glass of champagne with the full Monty, as tender as Fletcher, as witty as Beaumont, so his best things are done in the flush of the moment. If he waits, all is spoiled. He may stir it and shake it, but the fixed air once gone, he can never remake it. He might be a marvel of easy delightfulness, if he would not sometimes leave the hour out of spritefulness, and he ought to let scripture alone 'tis self-slaughter, for nobody likes inspiration and water. He'd have been just the fellow to sup at the Mermaid, cracking jokes at rare Ben, with an eye to the barmaid, his wit running up as canary ran down the topmost bright bubble on the wave of the town. Here comes Parker, the Olson of Passons, a man whom the church undertook to put under her ban, the church of Sossinus, I mean, his opinions being so ultra-Sinian, they shocked the Socinians, they believed faith. I'm puzzled, I think I may call their belief a believing in nothing at all, or something of that sort. I know they all went for a general union of total dissent. He went a step farther without cough or hem. He frankly avowed he believed not in them, and, before he could be jumbled up or prevented, from their orthodox kind of dissent he dissented.
There was heresy here, you perceive, for the right of privately judging means simply that like has been granted to me for deciding on you, and in happier times, before atheism grew, the deed contained clauses for cooking you too now at Xerxes, and not we all laugh, yet our foot with the same wave is wet that mocked Xerxes, and not, and we all entertain a secure private notion that are thus far.
We'll have a great weight with the ocean.
'Twas so with our liberal Christians. They bore with sincerest conviction their chairs to the shore. They brandished their worn theological birches, bade natural progress keep out of the churches, and expected the lines they had drawn to prevail with the fast-rising tide to keep out of their pale. They had formerly damned the pontifical see, and the same thing, they thought, would do nicely for P. But he turned up his nose at their mumming and shamming, and cared, shall I say, not a d for their damning. So they first rid him out of their church, and next minute turned round and declared he had never been in it.
But the ban was too small, or the man was too big, for he recks not their bells, books, and candles are fig. He scarce looks like a man who would stay treated shabbily. Sophroniscus' son's head o'er the features of Rabelais he bangs, and Beth works them. Their backs he salutes with the whole tree of knowledge torn up by the roots. His sermons with satire are plenteously verged, and he talks in one breath of Confucius, Cass, Zerdusht, Jack Robinson, Peter the Hermit, Strap, Dathan, Cush, pit not the bottomless, that he's not faith in Pan, Pillicock, Shakespeare, Paul, Toots, Mr. Tonson, Aldebaran, Alcindor, Ben Korat, Ben Jonson, Thoth, Richter, Joe Smith, Father Paul, Judah Muis, Nisus, Muritus, Hem, Scorpionus, Maccabee, Maccaboy, Mac-Mac-R.
Machiavelli, Condorcet, Count d'Orsay, Kildare, Say, Ganganelli, Orion, O'Connell, the Chevalier d'Etique. Oh, see the memoirs of Sully, the great toe of the statue of Jupiter, now made to pass for that of Jupiter by good Romish brass.
You may add for yourselves, for I find it a bore, all the names you have ever, or not, heard before, and when you've done that, why, invent a few more. His hearers can't tell you on Sunday beforehand, if in that day's discourse they'll be bibbled or Quraned, for he sees the idea by his martyrdom fired that all men not orthodox may be inspired, yet though wisdom profane with his creed he may weave in, he makes it quite clear what he doesn't believe in, while some, who decry him, think all kingdom come is a sort of a kind of a species of hum, of which, as it were, so to speak, not a crumb would be left, if we didn't keep carefully mum, and, to make a clean breast, that 'tis perfectly plain that all kinds of wisdom are somewhat profane. Now P.'s creed than this may be lighter or darker, but in one thing 'tis clear, he has faith, namely Parker, and this is what makes him the crowd-drawing preacher. There's a background of God to each hard-working feature. Every word that he speaks has been fierily furnaced in the blast of a life that has struggled in earnest. There he stands, looking more like a plowman than priest, if not dreadfully awkward, not graceful at least, his gestures all downright and same, if you will, as of brown-fisted hobnail in hoeing a drill, but his periods fall on you, stroke after stroke, like the blows of a lumberer felling an oak. You forget the man wholly, you are thankful to meet with a preacher who smacks of the field and the street, and to hear, when not over particular whence, almost Taylor's profusion, quite Latimer's sense.
There's Bryant, as quiet, as cool, and as ignified as a smooth, silent iceberg that never is ignified, save when by reflection 'tis kindled o' nights with a semblance of flame by the chill northern lights.
He may rank, Griswold says so, first bard of your nation. There's no doubt that he stands in supreme isolation. Where Thomas punishes, he may set his heel on, but no warm applauses come, Peel following eel on. He's too smooth and too polished to hang any zeal on unqualified merits. I'll grant, if you choose, he has but he lacks the one merit of kindling enthusiasm. If he stir you at all, it is just, on my soul, like being stirred up with the very North Pole. He is very nice reading in summer, but in Ternos, we don't want extra freezing in winter. Take him up in the depth of July. My advice is, when you feel an Egyptian devotion to Isis. But, deduct all you can, there's enough that's right good in him. He has a true soul for field, river, and wood in him, and his heart, in the midst of brick walls, all where earth is, glows, softens, and thrills with the tenderest charities to you mortals that delve in this trade-ridden planet. No, to old Berkshire's hills, with their limestone and granite.
If you're one in loco ad foco here to zippies, you will get of his outermost heart as I guess a piece, but you'd get deeper down if you came, as a precipice, and would break the last seal of its in with his fountain, if you only could palm yourself off for a mountain.
Mr. Phœbus, or somebody quite as discerning, some scholar who's hourly expecting his learning, calls be the American Wordsworth, but Wordsworth may be rated at more than your whole tuneful herd's worth.
No, don't be absurd. He's an excellent brain, but, my friends, you'll endanger the life of your client by attempting to stretch him up into a giant if you choose to compare him. I think there are two persons fit for a parallel. Thompson and Cowper. I don't mean exactly. There's something of each. There's T.'s love of nature. C.'s penchant to just makes up their minds so that C.'s spice of craziness shall balance and neutralize T.'s turn for laziness, and it gives you a brain cool, quite frictionless, quiet, whose internal police nips the buds of all riot, a brain like a permanent straitjacket put on the heart that strives vainly to burst off a button, a brain which, without being slow or mechanic, does more than a larger, less drilled, more volcanic. He's a Cowper condensed, with no craziness bitten, and the advantage that Wordsworth before him had written.
But my dear little bardlings, don't prick up your ears, nor suppose I would rank you and Bryant as peers if I call him an iceberg. I don't mean to say there is nothing in that which is grand in its weight. He is almost the one of your poets that knows how much grace, strength, and dignity lie in repose. If he sometimes falls short, he is too wise to mar his thoughts' modest fondness by going too far. 'Twould be well if your authors should all make a trial of what virtue there is in severe self-denial, and measure their writings by Hesiod's staff, which teaches that all has less value than half.
There's Whittier, whose swelling and vehement heart strains the straight-breasted drab of the Quaker part, and reveals the live man, still supreme and erect, underneath the bemumming wrappers of sect. There was ne'er a man born who had more of the swing of the true lyric bard, and all that kind of thing, and his failures arise, though he seem not to know it, from the very same cause that has made him a poet, a fervour of mind which knows no separation twixt simple excitement and pure inspiration, as my Pythoness sometimes erred from not knowing if Tweary or me a wind through her tripod was blowing. Let his mind once get head in its favourite direction, and the torrent of verse burst the dams of reflection, while, borne with the rush of the metre along, the poet may chance to go right or go wrong, content with a whirl and delirium of song. Then his grammar is not always correct, nor his rhymes, and he's prone to repeat his own lyrics sometimes, not his best, though, for those are struck off at white heats when the heart in his breast like a trip hammer beats, and can ne'er be repeated again any more than they could have been carefully plotted before, like old what's-his-name there at the Battle of Hastings, who, however, gave more than mere rhythmical bastings. Alquaker leads off metaphorical fights for reform and whatever they call human rights, both singing and striking in front of the war, and hitting his foes with the mallet of thought. NHC, one exclaims, on beholding his knocks, Vestes filii tui, O leather-clad fox.
Can that be thy son, in the battle's mid-din, preaching brotherly love, and then driving it into the brain of the tough old Goliath of sin, with the smoothest of pebbles from Casterly's spring impressed on his hard moral sense with a sling?
All honour and praise to the right-hearted bard who was true to the voice when such service was hard, who himself was so free he dared sing for the slave when to look, but a protest in silence was brave. All honour and praise to the women and men who spoke out for the dumb and the downtrodden then.
It needs not to name them. Already for each I see history preparing the statue, a niche they were harsh. But shall you be so shocked to hard words who have beaten your pruning hooks up into swords, whose rewards and hurrahs men are sure to gain by the reaping of men and of women and grain?
Why should you stand aghast at the fierce wordy war, if you scalp one another for bank or for tariff? Your calling them cutthroats and knaves all day long doesn't prove that the use of hard language is wrong, while the world's heart beats quicker to think of such men as signed tyranny's doom with a bloody steel pen, while on 4th of July's beardless orators fright one with hints at Harmodius and Aristogiton. You need not look shy at your sisters and brothers who stab with sharp words for the freedom of others. No, a wreath, twine a wreath for the loyal and true who, for sake of the many, dead stand with the few, not of blood spattered laurel for enemies braved, but of broad, peaceful oak leaves for citizens saved.
Here comes Daner, abstractedly loitering along, involved in a post future of song, who will be going to write what'll never be written till the muse, ere he think of it, gives him the mitten, who is so well aware of how things should be done, that his own works displease him before they're begun, who so well all that makes up good poetry knows, that the best of his poems is written in prose. All saddled and bridled stood Pegasus waiting. He was booted and spurred, but he loitered debating in a very grave question his soul was immersed, which foot in the stirrup he ought to put first, and, while this point and that he judiciously dwelt on, he, somehow or other, had written Paul Felton, whose beauties or faults, whichsoever you see there, you'll allow only genius could hit upon either.
That he once was the idle man none will deplore, but I fear he will never be anything more. The ocean of sun heaves and glitters before him, the depth and the vastness and longing sweet o'er him. He knows every breaker and shoal on the chart, he has the coast pilot and so on by heart, yet he spends his whole life, like the man in a fable, in learning to swim on his library table.
There swaggers John Neal, who has wasted in main the sinews and chords of his pugilist brain, who might have been poet, but that, in its stead, he preferred to believe that he was so already too hasty to wait till art's ripe fruit should drop. He must pelt down an unripe and colicky crop, who took to the lore, and had this sterling plea for it. It required him to quarrel, and paid him a fee for it, a man who's made less than he might have, because he always has thought himself more than he was, who, with very good natural gifts as a bard, broke the strings of his lyre out by striking too hard, and cracked half the notes of a truly fine voice, because song drew less instant attention than noise.
Ah, men do not know how much strength is in poise, that he goes the farthest who goes far enough, and that all beyond that is just bother and stuff.
No vain man matures, he makes too much new wood, his blooms are too thick for the fruit to be good. 'Tis the modest man ripens, 'tis he that achieves just what's needed of sunshine and shade. He receives the grapes to mellow, require the cool dark of their leaves. Kneel once balanced, he throws his mind always too far, whisking out flocks of comets, but never a star. He has so much muscle, and loves so to show it, that he strips himself naked to prove he's a poet, and to show he could leap art's wide ditch, if he tried, jumps clean o'er it, and into the hedge t' other side. He has strength, but there's nothing about him in keeping one git surelier onward by walking than leaping. He has used his own sinews himself to distress, and had done vastly more had he done vastly less. In letters, too soon is as bad as too late. Could he only have waited, he might have been great, but he plumped into Helicon up to the waist, and muddled the stream ere he took his first taste. There is Halfon, with genius so shrinking and rare that you hardly at first see the strength that is there, a frame so robust, with a nature so sweet, so earnest, so graceful, so lithe, and so fleet, is worth a descent from Olympus to meet. 'Tis as if a rough oak that for ages had stood, with his gnarled bony branches like ribs of the wood, should bloom, after cycles of struggle and scathe, with a single anemone trembly and wrathed. His strength is so tender, his wildness so meek, that a suitable parallel sets one to seek. He's a John Bunyan Fouke, a Puritan Tycho. When nature was shaping him, clay was not granted for making so full-sized a man as she wanted, so, to fill out her model, a little she spared from some finer grained stuff for a woman prepared, and she could not have hit a more excellent plan for making him fully and perfectly man.
The success of her scheme gave her so much delight that she tried it again shortly after, in white only. While she was kneading and shaping the clay, she sang to her work in her sweet childish way, and found, when she'd put the last touch to his soul, that the music had somehow got mixed with the whole. Here's Cooper, who's written 6 volumes to show he's as good as a lord. Well, let's grant that he's so. If a person prefer the description of praise, why, a cornet certainly cheaper than bass, but he need take no pains to convince us he's not as his enemies say the Americans got.
Choose any 12 men, and let's see read aloud that one of his novels of which he's most proud, and I'd lay any bet that, without ever quitting their box, they'd be all, to a man, for acquitting. He has drawn you one character, though, that is new, one wild flower he's plucked that is wet with the dew of this fresh western world, and, the thing not to mince, he has done naught but copied it ill ever since. His Indians, with proper respect be it said, are just natty bumpo, daubed over with red, and his very long toms are the same useful nat, rigged up in duck pants and a sou'wester hat. Though once in a coffin, a good chance was found to have slipped the old fellow away underground. All his other men figures are clothes upon sticks, the dernier chemise of a man in a fix, as a captain besieged, when his garrison small, sets up caps upon poles to be seen o'er the wall, and the women he draws from one model don't vary, all sappy as maples and flat as a prairie. When a character's wanted, he goes to the task as a Cooper would do in composing a casket. He picks out the staves of their qualities heedful, just hoops them together as tight as is needful, and, if the best fortune should crown the attempt, he has made it the most something wooden and empty. Don't suppose I would underrate Cooper's abilities. If I thought you do that, I should feel very ill at ease. The men who have given to one character life and objective existence are not very rife. You may number them all, both prose writers and singers, without overrunning the bounds of your fingers, and Natty won't go to oblivion quicker than Adams the parson or Primrose the vicar. There is one thing in Cooper I like too, and that is that on manners he lectures his countrymen gratis, not precisely so either, because, for a rarity, he is paid for his tickets in unpopularity. Now he may overcharge his American pictures, but you'll grant there is a good deal of truth in his strictures, and I honour the man who is willing to sink half his present repute for the freedom to think, and, when he has thought, be his cause strong or weak, will risk the other half for the freedom to speak, caring naught for what vengeance the mob has in store, let that mob be the upper 10,000 or lower. There are truths you Americans need to be told, and it never will refute them to swagger and scold John Bull, looking o'er the Atlantic, in choler at your aptness for trade, says you worship the dollar, but to scorn such idolatries what very few do, and John goes to that church as often as you do.
No matter what John says, don't try to outgrow him. T is enough to go quietly on and outgrow him like most fathers. Bull hates to see number one displacing himself in the mind of his son, and detests the same faults in himself he neglected when he sees them again in his child's glass reflected. To love one another you're too like by half. If he is a bull, you're a pretty stout calf, and tear your own pasture for naught, but to show what a nice pair of horns you're beginning to grow.
There are one or two things I should just like to hint, for you don't often get the truth told you in print. The most of you, this is what strikes all beholders, have a mental and physical stoop in the shoulders. Though you ought to be free as the winds and the waves, you've the gait and the manners of runaway slaves. Though you brag of your new world, you don't half believe in it, and as much of the old as is possible weave in it. Your goddess of freedom, a tight, buxom girl, with lips like a cherry and teeth like a pearl, with eyes bold as here's, and hair floating free, and full of the sun as the spray of the sea, who can sing at a husking or romp at a shearing, who can trip through the forests alone without fearing, who can drive home the cows with a song through the grass, keeps glancing aside into Europe's cracked glass, hides her red hands in gloves, pinches up her lithe waist, and makes herself wretched with transmarine taste. She loses her fresh country charm when she takes any mirror except her own rivers and lakes.
You steal Englishmen's books and think Englishmen's thought, with their salt on her tail you while ego is caught. All literature suits its each whisper and motion to what will be thought of it over the ocean. A cast clothes of Europe or statesmanship tries and mumbles against all blarneys and lies. Forget Europe wholly, or veins throb with blood, to which the dull current in hers is but mud. Let her sneer, let her say your experiment fails. In her voice there's a tremble, and now while she rails, and your shore will soon be in the nature of things covered thick with gilt driftwood of castaway kings, where alone, as it were in a Longfellow's wave, her fugitive pieces will find themselves safe.
Oh my friends, thank you God, if you have one, that he twixt the old world and you set the gulf of a sea. Be strong-backed, brown-handed, upright as your pines, by the scale of a hemisphere shape your designs. Be true to yourselves and this new 19th age, as a statue by powers, or a picture by page. Plow, sail, forge, build, carve, paint, make all over new. To your own new world instincts contrive to be true. Keep your ears open wide to the future's first call. Be whatever you will, but yourselves first of all. Stand fronting the dawn on toil's heaven-scaling peaks, and become my new race of more practical Greeks.
Hamo, your lightness at present, I shudder to tell OT, is that you have your slaves, and the Greek had his Hellas.
Here a gentleman present, who had in his attic more pepper than brains, shrieked.
The man's a fanatic. I am a capital tailor with warm tar and feathers, and will make him a suit that'll serve in all weathers. But we'll argue the point first. I'm willing to reason palaver before condemnations, but decent, so, through my humble person, humanity begs of the friends of true freedom alone of bad eggs.
But Apollo let one such a look of his show forth, as when, and so forth, and the gentleman somehow slunk out of the way, but, as he was going, gained courage to say,
As slavery in the abstract my whole soul rebels, I am as strongly opposed to teen as anyone else. I, no doubt, but whenever I've happened to meet with a wrong or a crime, it is always concrete.
answered P.H. Bus severely, then turning to us.
The mistake of such fellows as just made the fuss is only in taking a great busy nation for a part of their pitiful cotton plantation. But there comes Miranda, Zeus. Where shall I flee to? She is such a penchant for bothering me too. She always keeps asking if I don't observe a particular likeness twixt her and Minerva. She tells me my efforts in verse are quite clever. She's been travelling now, and will be worse than ever, one would think, though. A sharp-sighted notice she'd be of all that's worth mentioning over the sea, for a woman must surely see well, if she try, the whole of whose being's a capital I. She will take an old notion, and make it her own, by saying it, or in her sibylline tone, or persuade you 'tis something tremendously deep, by repeating it so as to put you to sleep, and she well may defy any mortal to see through it, when once she has mixed up her infinite me through it. There's one thing she owns in her own single right, it is native and genuine, namely her spite, though, when acting a censor, she privately blows a censer of vanity neath her own nose.
Here Miranda came up, and said,
Phœbus! Exclamation, you know that the infinite soul has its infinite woe, as I ought to know, having lived cheek by jowl since the day I was born. With the infinite soul I myself introduced, I myself, I alone, to my land's better life offers solely my own, who the sad heart of earth on their shoulders have taken, whose works sound a depth by life's quite unshaken, such as Shakespeare, for instance, the Bible, and Bacon, not to mention my own works times Nadia's feet, and, as for myself, I'm quite out of conceit. Quite out of conceit. I'm enchanted to hear it,
cried Apollo aside.
Who'd have thought she was near it? To be sure, one is apt to exhaust those commodities one uses too fast, yet in this case, as odd it is, as if Neptune should say to his turbots and whitings, I'm as much out of salt as Miranda's own writings, which, as she in her own happy manner has said, sound a depth, for 'tis one of the functions of lead. She often has asked me if I could not find a place somewhere near me that suited her mind. I know but a single one vacant, which she, with her rare talent that way, would fit to a T, and it would not imply any pause or cessation in the work she esteems her peculiar vocation. She may enter on duty today, if she chooses, and remain tiring woman for life to the muses.
Miranda meanwhile has succeeded in driving up into a corner, in spite of their striving, a small flock of terrified victims, and there, with an I turn the crank of the universe air, and a tone which, at least to my fancy, appears not so much to be entering as boxing your ears, is unfolding a tale of herself, I surmise, for 'tis dotted as thick as a peacock's with eyes. Apropos of Miranda, a rest on my oars and drift through a trifling digression on bows, for, though not wearing earrings in more majorum, our ears are kept bored just as if we still wore 'em. There was one feudal custom worth keeping, at least. Roasted boars made a part of each well-ordered feast, and of all quiet pleasures the very neplus was in hunting wild boars as the tame ones hunt us. Archaeologians, I know, who have personal fears of this wise application of hounds and of spears, have tried to make out, with a zeal more than wanted, 'twas a kind of wild swine that our ancestors hunted, but I'll never believe that the age which has strewn Europe all with cathedrals, and otherwise shown that it knew what was what, could by chance not have known spending, too, its chief time with its buff on, no doubt, which beast would improve the world most to thin out. I divide bows myself, in the manner of rifles, into two great divisions, regardless of trifles. There's your smooth-bore and screw-bore, who do not much vary in the weight of cold lead they respectively carry. The smooth-bore is one in whose essence the mind not a corner nor cranny to cling by can find. You feel as in nightmares sometimes, when you slip down a steep slated roof, where there's nothing to grip, you slide and you slide. The blank horror increases. You had rather by far be at once smashed to pieces. You fancy a whirlpool below, white and frothing, and finally drop off and light upon nothing. The screw-bore has twists in him, faint predilections for going just wrong in the tritest directions. When he's wrong he is flat. When he's right he can't show it. He'll tell you what Snook said about the new poet, or how Fulgrim was outraged by Tennyson's princess. He has spent all his spare time and intellect since his birth in perusing, on each art and science, just the books in which no one puts any reliance, and though Nemo, we're told, oris omnibus sapit, the rule will not fit him, however you shape it, for he has a perennial foison of sapness. He has just enough force to spoil half your day's happiness, and to make him a sort of mosquito to be with, but just not enough to dispute or agree with. These sketches I made not to be too explicit from two honest fellows who made me a visit, and broke, like the tale of the bear and the fiddle, my reflections on Halleck short off by the middle. I shan't now go into the subject more deeply, for I notice that some of my readers look sleepy. I will barely remark that, amongst civilized nations, there's none that displays more exemplary patience under all sorts of boring, at all sorts of hours, from all sorts of desperate persons, than ours. Not to speak of our papers, our state legislatures, and other such trials for sensitive natures, just look for a moment at Congress. Appalled, my fancy shrinks back from the phantom it called a why. There's scarcely a member unworthy to frown neath what for he nicknames the boreal crown. Only think what that infinite ball power could do if applied with a utilitarian view. Suppose, for example, we shipped it with care to Sahara's great desert and let it bore there. If they held one short session and did nothing else, they'd fill the whole waste with artesian wells. But 'tis time now with pen phonographic to follow through some more of his sketches, a laughing Apollo.
There comes Harry Franco, and, as he draws near, you find that the smile which you took for a sneer, one half of him contradicts the other. His wont is to say very sharp things and do very blunt, his manners as hard as his feelings are tender, and the salty he'll make when he means to surrender. He's in joke half the time when he seems to be sternest. When he seems to be joking, be sure he's in earnest. He has common sense in a way that's uncommon, hates humbug and cant, loves his friends like a woman, builds his dislikes of cards and his friendships of oak, loves a prejudice better than aught but a joke, is half upright Quaker, half downright come-outer, loves freedom too well to go stark mad about her, quite artless himself, is a lover of art, shuts you out of his secrets and into his heart, and though not a poet, yet all must admire in his letters of Pinto his skill on the lyre.
There comes Poe, with his raven, like Barnaby Rudge, 3/5 of him genius and 2/5 sheer fudge, who talks like a book of iambs and pentameters, in a way to make people of common sense damn meters, who has written some things quite the best of their kind, but the heart somehow seems all squeezed out by the mind, who but heyday. What's this?
Messrs. Matthews and Poe, you mustn't fling my balls at Longfellow so. Does it make a man worse that his character is such as to make his friends love him, as you think too much?
Why, there is not a bard at this moment alive more willing than he that his fellows should thrive, while you are abusing him. Thus even now he would help either one of you out of a slough. You may say that he's smooth and all, that till you're hoarse, but remember that elegance also is force. After polishing granite as much as you will, the heart keeps its tough old persistency still. Deduct all you can, it still keeps you at bay. Why, he'll live till men weary of Collins and Gray.
I'm not over fond of Greek meters in English. To me rhymes again, so it be not too Jinglish. And your modern hexameter verses are no more like Greek ones than sleek Mr. Pope is like Homer, as the roar of the sea to the coo of a pigeon is. So, compared to your moderns, sounds old Melsigenes, I may be too partial. The reason, perhaps, 'tis that I've heard the old blind man recite his own rhapsodies, and my ear with that music impregnate may be, like the poor exiled shell with the soul of the sea, or as one can't bear straws when his nature is cloven to its deeps within deeps by the stroke of Beethoven. But, set that aside, and 'tis truth that I speak, had Theocritus written in English, not Greek, I believe that his exquisite sense would scarce change a line in that rare, tender, virgin-like pastoral, Evangeline.
That's not ancient nor modern, its place is apart where time has no sway, in the realm of pure art. 'Tis a shrine of retreat from earth's hubbub and strife, as quiet and chaste as the author's own life.
There comes Philithea, her face all aglow. She has just been dividing some poor creature's woe, and can't tell which pleases her most, to relieve his want, or his story to hear and believe. No doubt against many deep griefs she prevails, for her ear is the refuge of destitute tales. She knows well that silence is sorrow's best food, and that talking draws off from the heart its black blood, so she'll listen with patience and let you unfold your bundle of rags as 'twere pure cloth of gold, which indeed, it all turns to as soon as she's touched it, and to borrow a phrase from the nursery muched it. She has such a musical taste, she will go any distance to hear one who draws a long bow. She will swallow a wonder by mere might and main, and thinks it Amatry's fault if she's fain to consider things flat, inasmuch as they're plain. Facts with her are accomplished, as Frenchmen would say, they will prove all she wishes them to either way, and as fact lies on this side or that, we must try, if we're seeking the truth, to find where it don't lie. I was telling her once of a marvelous aloe that for thousands of years had looked spindling and sallow, and, though nursed by the fruitfulest powers of mud, had never vouchsafed end so much as a bud, till its owner remarked as a sailor, often will in a calm that it never would blow, for he wished to exhibit the plant, and designed that its blowing should help him in raising the wind. At last it was told him that if he should water its roots with the blood of his unmarried daughter who was born, as her mother, a Calvinist said, with William Law's serious call on her head, it would blow as the obstinate breeze did when by a like decree of her father died Iphigenia. At first he declared he himself would be blowed ere his conscience with such a foul crime he would load, but the thought, coming oft, grew less dark than before, and he mused, as each creditor knocked at his door, if this were but done they would dun me no more. I told Philothea his struggles and doubts, and how he considered the ins and the outs of the visions he had, and the dreadful dyspepsy, how he went to the seer that lives at Poughkeepsie, how the seer advised him to sleep on it first, and to read his big volume in case of the worst, and further advised he should pay him $5 for writing hum on his wristbands and collars. 3 years and 10 days these dark words he had studied when the daughter was missed, and the aloe had budded. I told how he watched it grow large and more large, and wondered how much for the show he should charge. She had listened with utter indifference to this, till I told how it bloomed, and discharging its pistil with an aim the Eumenides dictated, shot the botanical filicide dead on the spot. It had blown, but he reaped not his horrible gains, for it blew with such force as to blow out his brains, and the crime was blown also, because on the wad, which was paper, was writ Visitation of God, as well as a thrilling account of the deed which the coroner kindly allowed me to read.
Well, my friend took the story up just, to be sure, as one might a poor foundling that's laid at one's door. She combed it and washed it and clothed it and fed it, and as if 'twere her own child most tenderly bred it, laid the scene of the legend, I mean far away among the green vales underneath Himalaya, and by artists like touches, laid on here and there, made the whole thing so touching. I frankly declare I have read it all thrice, and perhaps I am weak, but I found every time there were tears on my cheek.
The Pole, science tells us, the magnet controls, but she is a magnet to emigrant Poles, and folks with a mission that nobody knows, throng thickly about her as bees round a rose. She can fill up the carrots and such, make their scope converge to some focus of rational hope, and with sympathies fresh as the morning, their gall can transmute into honey. But this is not all. Not only for those she is solace, oh say, vice's desperate nursling adrift in Broadway, who clingest, with all that is left of thee human, to the last slender spar from the wreck of the woman, hast thou not found one shore where those tired drooping feet can reach firm Mother Earth, one full heart on whose beat the soothed head in silence reposing could hear the chimes of far childhood throb back on the ear?
Ah, there's many a beam from the fountain of day that, to reach us unclouded, must pass, on its way, through the soul of a woman, and hers is wide ope to the influence of heaven as the blue eyes of hope. Yes, a great heart is hers, one that dares to go into the prison, the slave hut, the alleys of sin, and to bring into each, or to find there, some line of the never completely out-trampled divine. If her heart at high flood swamped her brain now and then, 'tis but richer for that when the tide ebbs agin, as after old Nile has subsided, his plain overflows with a second broad deluge of grain. What a wealth would it bring to the narrow, and sour could they be as a child but for one little hour.
What? Irving? Thrice welcome, warm heart and fine brain, you bring back the happiest spirit from Spain, and the gravest sweet humor, that ever withers since Cervantes met death in his gentle despair. Nay, don't be embarrassed, nor look so beseeching, I shan't run directly against my own preaching, and having just laughed at the Raphaels and Dantes, go to setting you up beside Mackless Cervantes. But allow me to speak what I honestly feel, to a true poet heart add the fun of Dick Steele, throw in all of Addison, minus the chill, with the whole of that partnership stock and goodwill, mix well, and while stirring, hum o'er as a spell, the fine old English gentleman, simmer it well, sweeten just to your own private liking, then strain, that only the finest and clearest remain, let it stand out of doors till a soul it receives from the warm lazy sun loitering down through green leaves, and you'll find a choice nature, not wholly deserving a name either English or Yankee, just Irving.
There goes, but Stepnamini's Umbra, his name you'll be glad enough, some day or other, to claim, and we'll all crowd about him and swear that you knew him if some English critic should chance to review him. His old polkas Antini Prodicidatis Margaritas, for him you have verified gratis, what matters his name? Why, it may be Sylvester, Judd, Junior, or Junius, Ulysses, or Nestor, for aught I know or care. 'Tis enough that I look on the author of Margaret, the first Yankee book with the soul of down east in't, and things farther east, as far as the threshold of morning, at least, where awaits the fair dawn of the simple and true, of the day that comes slowly to make all things new. Tea has a smack of pine woods, of bare field and bleak hill, such as only the breed of the Mayflower could tone the Puritan shown in it, tough to the core, such as parade, smiting a gig on red mast and moor with an unwilling humour, half choked by the drought in brown hollows about the inhospitable mouth, with a soul full of poetry, though it has qualms about finding a happiness out of the Psalms, full of tenderness, too, though it shrinks in the dark, hamadryad-like, under the coarse, shaggy bank that sees visions, knows wrestlings of God with the will, and has its own Sinai's and thundering still.
Here,
Forgive me, Apollo,
I cried, while I pour my heart out to my birthplace, O loved more and more dear Bay State, from whose rocky bosom thy son should suck milk, strong will giving, brave, such as runs in the veins of old Greylock. Who is it that dares call thee peddler, a soul wrapped in bank books and shares? It is false. She's a poet. I see, as I write, along the far railroad the steam snake glide white, the cataract throb of her mill hearts I hear, the swift strokes of trip hammers weary my ear, sledges ring upon anvils, through logs the saw screams, blocks swing to their place, beetles drive home the beams. It is songs such as these that she croons to the din of her fast-flying shuttles, year out and year in, while from earth's farthest corner there comes not a breeze, but wafts her the buzz of her gold-leaning bees. What though those horn hands have as yet found small time for painting and sculpture and music and rhyme? These will come in due order. The need that pressed source was to vanquish the seasons, the ocean, the forest, to bridle and harness the rivers, the steam, making those whirl her mill wheels, this tug in her team, to vassalize old tyrant winter, and make him delve solely for her on river and lake. When this new world was parted, she strove not to shirk her lot in an heirdom, the tough, silent work, the hero share ever, from Heracles down to Odin, the earth's iron sceptre and crown. Yes, thou dear, noble mother, if ever men's praise could be claimed for creating heroical lays, thou hast won it. If ever the laurel divine crowned the maker and builder, that gloried is thine. Thy songs are right epic, they tell how this rude rock rib of our earth here was tamed and subdued. Thou hast written them plain on the face of the planet in brave, deathless letters of iron and granite. Thou hast printed them deep for all time. They are set from the same runic type, font, and alphabet with thy stout Berkshire hills and the arms of thy bay. They are staves from the burly old Mayflower lay. If the drones of the old world, in querulous ease, ask thy art and thy letters, point proudly to these, or, if they deny these are letters and art, toil on with the same old invincible heart. Thou art rearing the pedestal broad-based and grand, whereon the fair shapes of the artist shall stand, and creating, through labours undaunted and long, the theme for all sculpture and painting and song.
But my good mother Bay State wants no praise of mine. She learned from her mother a precept divine about something that butters no parsnips. Her forte in another direction lies. Work is her sport, though she'll courtesy and set her cap straight, that she will, if you talk about Plymouth and Red Bunkers Hill.
Dear, notable good wife, by this time of night her hearth is swept neatly, her fire burning bright, as she sits in a chair of home plan and make rocking, musing much, all the while, as she dawns on a stocking, whether turkeys will come pretty how next Thanksgiving, whether flour will be so dear, for, as sure as she's living, she will use ride and injun, then whether the pig by this time ain't got pretty tolerable big, and whether to sell it outright will be best, or to smoke hams and shoulders and salt down the rest. At this minute, she'd swap all my verses, are cruel.
For the last patent stove that is saving a fuel, so I'll just let Apollo go on, for his fish shows I've kept him waiting too long as it is.
If our friend there, who seems a reporter, is done with his burst of emotion, why, I will go on,
said Apollo. Some smiled, and, indeed, I must own there was something sarcastic, perhaps, in his tone.
There's Holmes, who is matchless among you for wit, a laden jar always full charged, from which flit the electrical tingles of hit after hit in long poems. 'Tis painful sometimes, and invites a thought of the way the new telegraph writes, which pricks down its little sharp sentences spitefully, as if you got more than you titled to rightfully, and you find yourself hoping its wild father lightning would flame in for a second and give you a frightening.
He has perfect sway of what I call a sham meter, but many admire it, the English pentameter, and Campbell, I think, wrote most commonly worse, with less nerve, swing, and fire in the same kind of verse, nor e'er achieved aught in so worthy a phrase as the tribute of Holmes to the Grandmaster lays.
You went crazy last year over Bulwer's new Timon, why, if be to the day of his dying, should rhyme on, heaping verses on verses, and tomes upon tomes, he could ne'er reach the best point and vigour of Holmes. His are just the fine hands, too, to weave you a lyric full of fancy, fun, feeling, or spiced with satiric in a measure so kindly, you doubt if the toes that are trodden upon are your own or your foes. There is Lowell, whose striving punishes to climb with a whole bale of isms tied together with rhyme. He might get on alone, spite of brambles and boulders, but he can't with that bundle he has on his shoulders. The top of the hill he will ne'er come nigh reaching till he learns the distinction twixt singing and preaching. His lyre has some chords that would ring pretty well, but he'd rather by half make a drum of the shell, and rattle away till he's old as Methusalem, at the head of a march to the last New Jerusalem. There goes Halleck, whose fanny's a pseudo Don Juan, with the wickedness out that gave salt to the true one. He's a wit, though, I hear, of the very first order, and once made a pun on the word soft recorder. More than this, he's a very great poet, I'm told, and has had his works published in crimson and gold, with something they call illustrations, to wit, like those with which Chapman obscured Holy Writ, which are said to illustrate, because, as I view it, like Lucas Hanon, they precisely don't do it to let a man who can write what himself understands keep clear, if he can, of designing men's hands, who bury the sense, if there's any worth having, and then very honestly call it engraving. But, to quit badinage, which there isn't much wit in, Halleck's better, I doubt not, than all he has written in his verse. A clear glimpse you will frequently find, if not of a great, of a fortunate mind, which contrives to be true to its natural loves in a world of back offices, ledgers, and stoves. When his heart breaks away from the brokers and banks, and kneels in his own private shrine to give thanks, there is a genial manliness in him that earns our sincerest respect. Read, for instance, his Burns, and we can't but regret seek excuse where we may that so much of a man has been peddled away. But what's that? A mass meeting? No, they're come in lots. The American Bulwers, Disraelis, and Scots, and in short the American everything else's, each charging the others with envies and jealousies. By the way, 'tis a fact that displays what profusions of all kinds of greatness bless free institutions, that while the old world has produced barely 8 of such poets as all men agree to call great, and of other great characters hardly a score, one might safely say less than that rather than more, with you every year a whole crop is begotten. They're as much of a staple as corn is, or cotton. Why, there's scarcely a huddle of log huts and shanties that has not brought forth its own Miltons and Dantes. I myself know 10 Byrons, 1 Coleridge, 3 Shelleys, 2 Raphaels, 6 Titians, I think 1 Apelles, Leonardo's and Rubens's plenty, as Likens, 1, but that 1 is plenty. American Dickens, a whole flock of lambs, any number of Tennysons. In short, if a man has the luck to have any sons, he may feel pretty certain that 1 out of 20 will be some very great person over again. There is one inconvenience in all this, which lies in the fact that by contrast we estimate size, and where there are none except Titans, great stature is only the normal proceeding of nature. What puff the strained sails of your praise will you furl at, if the calmest degree that you know is superlative?
At Rome, all whom Charon took into his where he must, as a matter of course, be well is must and error must. A Greek, too, could feel, while in that famous boat he tossed, that his friends would take care he was T, and formerly we, as through graveyards we passed, thought the world went from bad to worst, fearfully fast. Let us glance for a moment, 'tis well worth the pains, and note what an average graveyard contains. There lie levellers levelled, duns done up themselves, there are booksellers finely laid on their shelves, horizontally there lie upright politicians, dos with their patient sleep, faultless physicians, there are slave drivers quietly whipped underground, their bookbinders, done up in boards, are fast bound, their card players wait till the last trump be played, there all the choice spirits get finally laid, there the babe that's unborn is supplied with a birth, there men without legs get their 6 feet of earth, their lawyers repose, each wrapped up in his case, their seekers of office are surer of a place, their defendant and plaintiff get equally cast, their shoemakers quietly stick to the last, their brokers at length become silent as stocks, their stage drivers sleep without quitting their box, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth, and so on. With this kind of stuff one might endlessly go on. To come to the point, I may safely assert you will find in each yard every cardinal virtue. Each has 6 truest patriots, 4 discoverers of ether, who never had thought on tea nor mentioned it either. 10 poets, the greatest who ever wrote rhyme. 240 first men of their time. 1 person whose portrait just gave the least hint its original had a most horrible squinter. 1 critic, most what do they call it, reflective, who never had used the phrase ob or subjective. Of 40 fathers of freedom, of whom 20 bred their sons for the race once, at so much a head, and their daughters for 4.
30 mothers of Gracchi non-resistance who gave many a spiritual black eye. 8 true friends of their kind, one of whom was a jailer. 4 captains almost as astounding as Taylor. 2 dozen of Italy's exiles who shoot us his Kaisership daily. Stern pen and ink Brutuses, who, in Yankee parlors, with crucified smile, mount serenely their country's funereal pile. 9 to 9 Irish heroes, ferocious rebellers gainst the Saxon in Cismarine garrets and cellars, who shake their dread fists o'er the sea and all that, as long as a copper drops into the hat. 900 Teutonic Republicans stark from Vateland's battles just won in the park, who the happy profession of martyrdom take whenever it gives them a chance at a stake. 6 to 2 second Washingtons, 2 or 3 Jacksons, and so many everythings else that it racks one's poor memory too much to continue the list, especially now they no longer exist. I would merely observe that you've taken to giving the puffs that belong to the dead to the living, and that somehow your trump of contemporary doom's tones is tuned after all dedications and tombstones.
Here the critic came in, and a thistle presented from a frown to a smile. The god's features relented, as he stared at his envoy, who, swelling with pride, to the god's asking look, nothing daunted, replied,
You're surprised, I suppose, I was absent so long, but your godship respecting the lilies was wrong. I hunted the garden from one end to t'other, and got no reward but vexation and bother, till, tossed out with weeds in a corner to wither, this one lily I found and made haste to bring hither. Did he think I had given him a book to review? I ought to have known what the fellow would do,
muttered Phœbus aside.
For Thistle will pass beyond doubt for the queen of all flowers with an ass he has chosen in just the same way as he chews his specimens out of the books he reviews. And now, as this offers an excellent text, I'll give some brief hints on criticism next.
So, musing a moment, he turned to the crowd, and clearing his voice, spoke as follows aloud.
My friends, in the happy days of the muse, we were luckily free from such thing as reviews. Then North came between with its fog to make clearer the heart of the poet to that of his hero. Then the poet brought heaven to the people, and they felt that they, too, were poets in hearing his lay. Then the poet was prophet, the past in his soul procreated the future, both parts of one whole. Then for him there was nothing too great or too small, for one natural day desanctified all, and then the bard o'er no clipper and meter of mood, save the spirit of silence that hovers and broods o'er the seas and the mountains, the rivers and woods. He asked not earth's verdict, forgetting the clods. His soul soared and sang to an audience of gods. 'Twas for them that he measured the thought and the line, and shaped for their vision the perfect design, with as glorious a foresight, a balance as true, as swung out the worlds in the infinite blue. Then a glory and greatness invested man's heart, the universal, which now stands estranged and apart, in the free individual moulded. Was art then? The forms of the artist seemed thrilled with desire for something as yet unattained, fuller, higher, as once with her lips, lifted hands, and eyes listening, and her whole upward soul in her countenance glistening, Eurydice stood like a beacon unfired, which, once touched with flame, will leap heavenward inspired, and waited with answering kindle to mark the first gleam of Orpheus that pained the red dark.
Then painting, song, sculpture did more than relieve the need that men feel to create and believe, and as, in all beauty, who listens with love hears these words oft repeated beyond and above, so these seemed to be but the visible sign of the grasp of the soul after things more divine. They were ladders the artist erected to climb o'er the narrow horizon of space and of time, and we see there the footsteps by which men had gained to the one rapturous glimpse of the never attained, as shepherds could sometimes trace in a sod the last burning print of a sky-cleaving god.
But now, on the poet's disprivised moods would do this and do that. The poet critic intrudes while he thinks he's been barely fulfilling his duty to interpret twixt men and their own sense of beauty, and has striven, while others sought honour or pelf, to make his kind happy as he was himself. He finds he's been guilty of horrid offences in all kinds of moods, numbers, genders, and tenses. He's been up and subjective, what Kettle calls pot, precisely, at all events, what he ought not. You have done this, says one judge. You done that, says another. You should have done this, grumbles one. That, says t'other. Never mind what he touches, one shrieks out taboo.
And while he is wondering what he shall do, since each suggests opposite topics for song, they all shout together, "You're right." And you're wrong. Nature fits all her children with something to do. He who would write and can't write can surely review, can set up a small booth as critic and sell us his petty conceit and his pettier jealousies. Thus a lawyer's apprentice, just out of his teens, will do for the Geoffrey of 6 magazines. Having read Johnson's Lives of the Poets half through, there's nothing on earth he's not competent to. He reviews with as much nonchalance as he whistles. He goes through a book and just picks out the thistles. It matters not whether he blame or commend. If he's bad as a foe, he's far worse as a friend. Or let an author but write what's above his poor scope, he goes to work gravely and twists up a rope, and, inviting the world to see punishment done, hangs himself up to bleach in the wind and the sun. 'Tis delightful to see, when a man comes along who has anything in him peculiar and strong, every cockboat that swims clear its fierce pop conduct at him, and make, as he passes, its ludicrous peck at him.
Here Mirander came up and began.
As to that,
Apollo at once seized his gloves, cane, and hat, and seeing the place getting rapidly cleared, I too snatched my notes and forthwith disappeared. I hope you enjoyed reading the Book of Fable for Critics with me. If you liked this, please remember to like and subscribe. Please visit at Adonomy if you want to see different types of videos we produce. For statistics on our videos, visit at Adonomy.co. Visit our story reading channel website at https://adonomy.com/adonomaproject/adonomastories/. Happy YouTube travels!